Iain Duncan Smith, who's previously been sanctioned, of course, by the Chinese regime. Very good morning to you, Iain. It's an appalling breach of protocol, this story, isn't it, apart from anything else, and of possibly the law?
Well, it shows to what extent this government is trying to manipulate everything so that they can get some kind of trade arrangement with China. They're prepared to give them this ludicrous, huge embassy with an extra 200 spies in it.
Yeah.
And they were told, obviously, when Jonathan Powell went over to China, that has to go ahead if they want a trade arrangement, even though most people oppose it. And secondly, they were obviously told, drop the prosecutions, because they will be embarrassing. So they come back and they decide they've got to stop the prosecution, which is already, by this way, building to the moment when they're going to take it to court. And at the last moment, the CPS drop it. And we now know, I'm pretty certain, that the government says CPS took the decision. They did, which is rightly what they do. But the reason is because the government itself failed to define China as a threat or an enemy, which was critical to the old national security legislation, was that you could only leak to an enemy if you're a spy and you're going to be prosecuted. So that failure meant the CPS had nowhere to go with it. They had to kill it.
Right. And Chris Philp, your colleague and Shadow Home Secretary, says that it's inconceivable that Mr. Powell acted without Sir Keir Starmer's sign-off. What do you make of that?
Well, of course, he doesn't act alone. He's a servant in the sense that he is a civil servant, and he advises the government, but the governments make the decisions. And I have heard that they only went and asked the Foreign Office for the statement, but they should have asked the Home Secretary, the Home Office, because they would have defined them almost certainly as a threat. And it's how you carefully place the idea in the heads of the CPS. And of course this was manipulating the case. I saw all the security services long before this case, and they told me in absolute terms that they had these two banged to rights and that they knew that they would get the prosecution. So it appears at the end the only thing outstanding was, did they fit within the national security law as it existed? It's now been changed, which meant that you could only be prosecuted for spying if you leaked to an enemy or to a threat, a nation that's a threat to you, and they failed to say that.
Yeah, and this comes down to Mr. Powell's deputy, a guy called Matt Collins, who we're told was not prepared to call China an enemy in court. But it also raises the question about the case itself, because surely the matters arising from the case should be heard in a court of law, because we kind of deserve to know exactly what this is all about, don't we?
Yeah, completely. I mean, it should have been out there. They should have been prosecuted, and the case should have been heard by the public. The reality is China is a distinct, probably the greatest threat that we face now. And they are organizing all the other totalitarian states as well, like Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they're working, as you saw maybe a month and a half ago, they had this big meeting in Beijing, and President Xi talked about a new world order, basically bringing down the world order of the West, which was about, democracy, freedom, human rights, the rule of law. They want to bring that down and impose on the rest of the world, eventually, their form of government, which is totalitarian, in which they carry out slave labor, genocide. You get executed at the drop of a hat if you don't agree with the government. All that is what they want to replace what we have now, and that is a threat.
Yeah, and it also calls into question another case where it could well be that the government, in one way, shape or form, whether it was Keir Starmer, whether it was Jonathan Powell, whoever it was, have lent on the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, which Keir Starmer used to run, to act in a particular manner, which again is something that Downing Street continually denies doing, but this is more evidence that surely that's exactly what they're doing.
Well, what they did, certainly really, what they actually did was realize that the CPS would have to kill the case if the target of this, China, was not defined as an enemy. And you'll notice actually a few months ago they came out under the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. You have an upper tier, and countries in the upper tier are defined as threats. So what do? They put Russia, North Korea and Iran in the upper tier, but failed to put China in the upper tier, and they referred to China not as a threat but as a challenge. This is all semantics, it's all words. The government is in Project Kowtow to China, on bended knee for almost anything. And all we'll get is a lot of dumping of electric cars, cheap batteries, solar arrays made by slave labor. That's what China wants to do to us as a market. They're not interested in investing in the UK. And we are sort of going towards this like sleepwalkers, led by a government that has got no courage and no sense of what is reality. Reality is China is a major threat to the way that we live our lives and, I think, into the future peace of the world.
Yeah. But this is a government by semantics, though, isn't it? Because they come up with phrases and they come up with names for things which are clearly not actually accurate. Like, for example, the one-in, one-out scheme, which they keep calling it a one-in, one-out scheme, which is clearly not one-in, one-out.
Yes.
You know, they've sent 10 people back and they've had about 10,000 people come in. You know, they keep giving things names as though people are stupid.
Well, that's exactly the point. You know, do as I say, not as I do. And that's the reality for this government. You know, they promise all the things that they're going to do, and then when they don't achieve it, they try and weave a web of words around it to say, well, actually, we did achieve it, you just didn't know it. And this is exactly the same, you know, with migration. They said, we're going to smash the gangs. Well, how's that going after over a year now? They're not getting very close to it. And the answer is because it doesn't work. The only thing that will work with migration is to do what Kemi's talking about right now, which is to get out of the Convention of Human Rights, sort out and leave all those ridiculous agreements we have in the UN about the rights of the child and the whole thing about the conventions to do with torture, etc. We need to set our laws here in the UK, and we need judges to obey what Parliament says. And the point about this is Parliament's sovereign, so we should now be able to do this. And then what we say, if you land illegally here, then you're going to another place, and we're going to send you away. It's as simple as that. Therefore, it's not worth you paying huge sums of money or taking the risk. And that would stop the boats coming over. And we have to get that done, but this government is not going to do it.
No, they really aren't. Tory party conference for you, Sir Iain. I don't know if you want to tell us how many you've been to, but there can't be one that you've been to which is slightly less optimistic, perhaps, than this one.
Well, it's a difficult time, let's be honest about it. We were in government, things went wrong in the last few years. COVID didn't help, and nor did the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. All of these things added to the woes meant you borrowed more and spent more, and therefore you have to get it down. So these were difficulties, but also there were things that we could have done which we didn't act on, and we weren't bold, and one of these was obviously to do with migration. And I think it's the issue around migration which has hurt us the most. And it's coming to terms with that right now. We've a long way to go, but we have to rebuild to get the respect of the British public again, to get them to listen to us. It's not going to happen overnight. Some of my colleagues think there's some kind of messiah in the wings. There's no messiah. It's called hard work, honesty, and a determination to learn from the mistakes that we made and let the public understand that. And so, to that degree, that's what this conference is the start of, really, a fight back. I think that all those on the right eventually need to come back together. But the Conservative Party is, of course, the key party in all of that. And St. Kemi's, so far, done a very good job. And she's building and she's learning too. We need to make sure we get behind her.
Yeah, she talks about rebuilding from where she started, but a lot of people criticise her for not going fast enough. Do you think that's fair?
Well, you can rush at stuff if you want when you arrive, and if you know exactly where you're going and you know what the problem is and how to solve it. But you know, I think people have got fed up with this government and with previous governments where you say something but you don't deliver it. So what she chose to do, I thought quite rightly, and I talked to her about this before, was that when it comes to sorting out migration and the illegals and the boats, you have to have a sound policy that tells the public that you know how it can be done, and that policy will work, and that on day one you would introduce all of the requirements to get it done. Unlike this government, which has basically been meandering around for over a year. And so this conference yesterday, we had what is a very detailed plan as how you leave the Court of Human Rights, the Convention of Human Rights, and what you would also have to deal with, such as some of those UN conventions, Refugee Convention, etc. That's now detailed, black and white, and now giving strength to that is to say, right, we know what we're going to do this is our pledge, we're moving on. Next thing, we need to deal with the huge hidden taxes of net zero, which he's going to be talking about, and the ridiculous nature of the fast race to get to this arbitrary date when we are one of the least polluting countries already in the world. But this government is charging everybody huge extra hidden sums of money, which is like an extra load of tax, which is why the economy hasn't been doing so well, because of the huge costs on dashing to this net zero nonsense, which we can get to in good time and reasonably well, but making sure that technology leads the way. And the trouble is, right now we've got people who shouldn't be trusted with anything, like Mr. Miliband, in charge of that subject.
Yes, that is a bit worrying. Let me just ask you finally about this protest conversation that's going on. Shabana Mahmood says she wants to crack down on protests which are repetitive, which take place in the same location time after time. There are some who say that's good because that means that these pro-Palestinian protests will come to an end because they've been going for 2 years now, every single weekend. Fine, fair enough. But what if that extends suddenly to all sorts of protests and the whole question of free speech and whether maybe some protests that you don't agree with are still allowed to go ahead, or whether they will be banned by this government?
Well, it depends what she comes forward with, but the one bit I think has been the problem in all of this is that the right to protest has become actually also quite malignant. And a lot of these protests now are quite threatening in the sense that their continuous protesting has created a real problem. We've seen the rise of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom, and we saw these terrible attacks 2 days ago and the murders. All of this is connected, and so I think the bit that needs adjusting in the right to protest is that repetitive, constant, long-standing protests in the same area can be very, very damaging to people's worries and concerns and the sense that they're being put upon totally. So you can make your protest, you have a right to do that, do it peacefully, but doing it again and again and again in the same location is in fact a reasonable and viable issue to look at. The second bit of it, of course, is practical. You know, the police, I'm an Outer London MP, and I have to tell you, every time these protests take place, you know, all the Outer London boroughs get stripped of their police and they're taken down into central London. It's hard enough to try and get the police to focus on things like antisocial behaviour and shoplifting, which now, by the way, is not simple, but it is very violent, and they steal huge amounts and they threaten people on the high streets, gang warfare, etc. All of this needs our police in post doing their jobs, arresting people and getting them off the streets. But if we keep on getting them sucked down into central London on a very regular basis, it makes it very difficult for the police to do what they're supposed to do. So that has to be in the equation as well. How much does this put extra strains on the police in trying to keep the peace and also get after criminals? And for those of my constituents and many others living in outer London, many's the time they're saying, where are our police? And quite often they're down in central London trying to keep the peace down there. And I think it's important for us to get a balance in this. So in a way, if she's touching on that, then I would be supportive of it. Obviously not shutting down on free speech, but just getting this in perspective and the scale of it.
Yeah. Iain Duncan Smith, Sir Iain Duncan Smith, thank you very much indeed. Former Conservative Party leader, live from Manchester Conservative Party conference, of course, going up there.